This is Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. I'm Lucy May. High interest rates and a dearth of available housing stock has made home buying a challenge in the tri-state. And the homeownership rate among Black households in Cincinnati is disproportionately low at 25% compared to Cincinnati's 74% white homeownership rate. Now, a new partnership between the Port and the Greater Cincinnati Realtist Association seeks to close that Black homeownership gap with home listings that are affordable for first-time home buyers. Joining me now to talk about that partnership and the current housing market are Greater Cincinnati Realtist Association Chairman Alrosser. Welcome, Al.
Thank you.
And the Port Executive Vice President Philip Denning. Thanks for being here, Philip.
Hey there. Thanks for having us.
You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or by emailing talk@wvxu.org. Philip, the Port and the Greater Cincinnati Realtist Association announced this new partnership a little earlier this month. How did this partnership come about and why?
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having us on, and thanks for both of us, really. Back in 2020, during COVID, real estate was doing all kinds of crazy things, and one of the things that we realized at the time was just how big the institutional investor impact was of an impact they were having on really the ability for first-time home buyers to get their foot in the door here in Hamilton County and Cincinnati into home ownership. And we know that people generally in the United States build wealth through home ownership, and this was a major impact that it was having. So the Port embarked on a big initiative at the time and did a bunch of research to understand that more than 5,000 single-family homes had been purchased by just a few institutional investors in a small number of years, and didn't really know what to do about it at the time. And so ultimately, we talked with a bunch of partners, obviously the private community like the Realtist and brokers, but partners like Working in Neighborhoods, Price Hill Will, Legal Aid, that were also dealing with the other side of the impact of people who didn't have access to homes and home ownership. And ultimately, we took a huge risk to purchase these homes, 194 homes, and make them available to primarily low to moderate income families in Hamilton County for the opportunity to be homeowners. And it made a big splash here locally, nationally, just because of how punishing the real estate market was then. And honestly, it hasn't gotten any better since. So that's kind of what's been going on at the Port. And the opportunity to work with the Realtist has been a fantastic one to expand that reach into our communities in Hamilton County.
Yeah. Al, I talked about these statistics, the gap between Black homeownership and white homeownership in Cincinnati. There's also a big gap in Hamilton County as a whole. Mm-hmm. Talk with us about why the region has been more challenging for Black homeowners. Why does that gap exist? What are some of the historic reasons and the current challenges?
So historically, it has been a challenge for Black families in just getting pre-approved. Nobody's buying a house unless either they have cash or they need a loan. And most people have to get a loan. So it starts there. And so lenders historically have been held accountable, have had challenges with pre-approving folks from certain neighborhoods, right? And so what we know as redlining, which is an interesting concept where they say, we don't do loans in this neighborhood because values always tend to go down. Well, if you're not doing loans in those neighborhoods and people can't afford to pay cash to update, remodel, and fix up their house, what's going to happen? The value is going to decline. And then they're going to say, see, I told you, right?
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling prophecy. And so traditionally, that has been the challenge, getting pre-approved for various reasons. And currently, that's still a challenge. And so the Realtist, we have in our mission to serve the unserved and underserved, as well as hold some of these lenders accountable for, getting folks pre-approved who deserve to be pre-approved, not just because they're Black, but just because they qualify, and not just to get them pre-approved, but also to get them approved to be able to close on the loan. Because some lenders have played the shell game to say, well, we have all these pre-approvals. Yes, but then when we go through the actual loan process for approval, then there's all these so-called challenges, right, that don't seem to come up in other communities. And so that has been a huge challenge. And now that we're kind of making some headway in that, then as Phil mentioned, the market challenges of low inventory. Now rates are, I'd say, back to normal, not high, right? Because they never should have been that low for that long, which is part of why inventory is so low and prices are so high. But now with prices being so high, as mentioned earlier in the newscast, I heard the news report, and the inflation, it's not really just Black families, it's just the average working person, right? In Cincinnati now, and I've been licensed since 2001, so I've seen a lot of changes. But now to buy anything under $200,000, it was a challenge unless it needed a lot of work, right? And so the general rule is you can buy about 3 times your income. Well, $180,000, that means you're making $60,000 a year. You're not broke, right, at $60,000 a year. But a $180,000 house, not so much anymore in the average, what we considered average neighborhoods. So this initiative and this partnership with the port is going to make that a lot more reachable for average folks who make reasonable incomes to support their families to be able to afford a decent house in average neighborhoods that they currently live in and want to stay in.
Mm-hmm. You know, Philip, Al was just mentioning that, you know, sometimes a house under $200,000, you can only find it if it needs a lot of work. My understanding is these properties the port bought needed a lot of work. Talk to us about what kind of shape these properties were in. Did the port know what kind of shape they were all in before buying them?
Yeah. No, unfortunately. That was kind of a peculiarity of the sale process, actually. It was a receivership sale, so the port or any other buyer was only allowed to see 30 of the houses, and as I was talking with Al previously, we didn't get to see the 30 of the 200 houses. So it became pretty apparent that these had just been really, really disinvested. And when you think about it, you know, if you are a homeowner, homes are always, you know, something's always breaking, something always needs to be fixed. They really aren't a cash flow kind of investment. You know, it's an investment that you hold over a long time to build wealth for your family. Because these were treated like cash flow investments, you know, the way that they do make money in that way is if you don't do the proper improvements. And so they have been in really terrible quality. And that's really what the first year and a half here has been about for the port, is making lots and lots of improvements, not just cosmetic improvements, but really bones of improvements to these houses. One of the challenges that you get into there, that we get into, aligns actually and is compounded by what I was just saying. You know, the port is interested in this whole endeavor, frankly, just as a break even. We want to do this to create home ownership opportunities for Hamilton County residents. And we don't mind spending what we thought was going to be $35,000 per house is now turning into more like $75,000 or $80,000 per house in improvements. So quite a big difference. And we don't mind spending it as long as we can break even. In a lot of these neighborhoods, a $150,000 house is one of the most expensive home sales on the street. And while that isn't very high from an average perspective in the county, that means you need to convince a bank, you know, your lender, to approve and get an appraisal that says it is worth $150,000. And so then you get into really the systemic leftovers of the racist, you know, redlining practices. You have this a comparable appraisal problem with a lot of these neighborhoods. And that's another challenge we've had to dig into here with a lot of other partners to figure out how to solve. Yeah.
I want to remind our listeners we're talking about a new partnership that aims to increase Black home ownership in Cincinnati. You can join the conversation by calling 513-419-7100 or emailing talk@wvxu.org. Philip, we've talked in the past about institutional investors. These properties that the port bought were owned by an institutional investor. Some would argue that institutional investors are necessary, that only big investors have the resources to make the repairs that some of these homes need, the deep pockets to do that. Al's kind of laughing at me here. No. How would you respond to that? What do you think about that, Al?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
No, there are plenty of local investors who have the ability to buy, rehab, maintain properties in a better way than many of these institutional buyers, because some of these institutional buyers don't do as well of a job as they should. And they have the money, but they don't do it. And so when you have someone who's local, who's invested, who lives here, who interacts directly with the tenants, they tend to care a little bit more and actually do a better job. So I'm sorry, I wasn't laughing at you.
No,
it was
no,
the comment that comes from them to say, oh, well, we're the only ones. No, you're not. Right. And so sorry, I didn't mean to interfere with you.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, at the end of the day, the port is an economic development, for the good of Hamilton County residents. And a lot of the time you spend in economic development is chasing investment. Investment is good. Investment is what we want. Investment is what ultimately we're all searching for our neighborhoods. But what investors of that size are doing is not investment. It's more extraction. And that's where it becomes so pervasive, especially in a real estate market. And we haven't even talked about this yet, where they're raising the rent 15% a year, every year for 3 years, during COVID. And you had families that were paying, $800 or $900 a month, and now they're paying $1,400 a month for a property that's the exact same property they were paying. They were renting from the same entity a few years ago, and that's just a huge strain on those families.
Sure. Well, we do have a caller on the line. Hey, Mark, thanks for calling. What is your question or comment?
Thank you, Lucy. I'm calling because I want the panelists to deal with this issue. In Cincinnati, we have these issues where people buying homes are still looking, young couples particularly are looking at the school system. But you can't talk about housing without talking about the Cincinnati public school system, bottom line. And then we have this issue here with a lot of gentrification going on where older people are selling their homes, moving out, and then these areas are being gentrified. But we're losing the two key elements, which are children and older people, which sustain your society and give the measure in your society of how well you're introducing things for the future and how well you're dealing with legacy issues. And a lot of gentrification has went on in the city to the detriment of many older black residents. And then we also have the school crisis. So I think the port needs to deal with these two great issues, the children and the educational process in Cincinnati and the older people. Down at TQL Stadium and over the Rhine, there was much displacement of older people, a lot of development going on, but we still have great issues with the school system down there. Taft High School, other schools around there, plagued with much violence, even though the housing stock has improved and there's much development going on. But you cannot build a city without dealing with young people and older people. And those two matters have to be addressed by the leaders in the city, particularly the Port Authority, the Realtist, political leaders, and so forth. And that's why we're having the problems we're having. That's all I want to say.
Well, thank you, Mark. There's a lot there that Mark's talking about, and some is beyond, the purview, I think, of what you all do. But what kind of things do you take into consideration when it comes to school systems? That is certainly something that a lot of home buyers look at, especially young families. When it comes to gentrification and making sure older people can stay in their neighborhoods and their homes, is that something that's part of these considerations?
So, one of the things he mentioned was the older people moving out, but actually some are aging out or passing away, and then those homes, and we've had this discussion at various venues, those homes are being left to younger family members. And then when we talk about the institutional buyers, that's where they actually are able to grab a lot of these properties. because sometimes the properties aren't in the greatest condition because the elders have aged into the house to the point where they couldn't maintain them well. And so you have an institutional buyer who's offering cash right now, close in a week, as is. And the younger family members are saying they're doing the money grab and not thinking about the legacy of the family house, the real estate, and what it could turn into. And so that's, as the Greater Cincinnati Realtist Association, we've talked about creating education, right, for the community to say, don't sell the house so quickly. I understand, yes, cash in your hand is very attractive. However, the community, right, effect of doing that is what we're trying to combat in this partnership of having all of these institutional, companies come in and just buying up all these properties. And then the gentrification is they take that house, rehab it, and then make it a $300,000, $350,000 in a neighborhood that used to be a $100,000 neighborhood. Well, now the gentrification is more on an economic level, right? Because who's affording that? Who's moving in? And it's like, well, the community is the people, not just the name of the neighborhood. People say, oh, well, yeah, I'm doing rehab and doing all this in Evanston or in Avondale. And it's like, okay, historically, there's been certain residents there, but that resident population or demographic is changing. So the community is the people who are there, not just the name of the neighborhood and what was historically there. So we have to educate, right, our young folks, as he mentioned, to hold on to that. And that means something to the community versus just a few dollars in their pocket right now.
Yeah. Philip, where is the port when it comes to fixing up these 194 properties that the organization purchased? It sounds like they needed, in many cases, a lot more work than you expected. Where are you all with that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So we've had 38 houses that have begun and are in process of getting renovated, of the about 200. And we really started in earnest over this past summer. And we started with the vacant properties. So there were about 65 of these 200 properties that were vacant when we purchased them. And those are the easiest to start on because they're already vacant. Just to be clear, in the meantime, we're doing, I think year to date, we've done over $500,000 improvements on the occupied properties, and those are just smaller improvements. Leaking pipes, need a new water heater, don't have heat today. So we haven't stopped any of that investment, which really is what a standard local investor should be doing with their properties they're managing. And then this year to date, we've been under rehabilitation for about 40 of these properties, and we've started to list them. This partnership with the Realtist has been incredible. Deborah Robb, who's worked for the Port for almost 20 years now, believe it or not, she's sold 10 of these properties, or has listed 10 of these properties very recently. But at some point, we just needed more help and we needed more firepower, and that's where this Realtist partnership comes in. And we had 8 more properties that were ready about 2 weeks ago, and the Realtist had them up and listed very quickly. So we're super excited about having their resources to bring to bear. We haven't. This is not a subsidy model, so we don't have any other funds to use on these properties other than the capital that's tied up in them. So we're very interested in getting these properties sold to make them homeownership, but also because we'll directly take those proceeds and start renovating the next batch of houses and self-financing it.
Al, explain how this will work. I know an important goal of this new partnership is to increase Black homeownership. How does that work? I mean, I imagine you can't restrict homes to these only Black buyers. So how is that going to work?
So, yes, thank you for that question, because first of all, that would be illegal, right? Fair housing laws, race is right. We can't do that. I want to, change the narrative that low or moderate income is not synonymous with black folks.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And so that's why I addressed it earlier as working folks who just, make certain amounts of money, who need to get into homes. Now, the Greater Cincinnati Realtist Association and the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, our national organization, is focused on increasing black home ownership just because the numbers are not where they should be, as you mentioned at the beginning of the segment. And so a lot of our clients, a lot of our, the folks we serve happen to be black, but a lot of them aren't. And so we list and sell the houses just like we would any other, because legally we would have to, and ethically that's what we would do. And so, but they tend to be in some neighborhoods where, again, historically they were black neighborhoods, and so that may be the person who ends up with that property or may not. And so, we have to be careful in two ways. Number one, to say this isn't just for black folks, all right, because I've had that question already since we made the press conference. I've had that question a couple times. Is this just for black? Well, that's illegal. And number two, low and moderate income is not synonymous with black or brown people. Okay, so want to dispel that notion and myth and that narrative, and so we just serve. We are here to serve the unserved and underserved in those communities, whatever they look like, whoever they happen to be, and so we're just happy to partner with the port. A lot of our members. Of course, our members are not all black, right? We've had this discussion as well, that we have a lot of members, lenders, agents, inspectors of all races, and so we serve we just serve the city and our clientele as best as we can, and we just look forward to being able to reach into the communities where these properties are listed, because a lot of them are folks that we know, folks that we've served, family members of folks that we've served in the past, and I think we can keep those communities together versus what the caller mentioned about gentrifying and changing the whole context.
Yeah. Strengthening communities.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. I've been talking with Greater Cincinnati Realtist Association Chairman Alrosser and the Port Executive Vice President Philip Denning. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Cincinnati Edition on 91.7 WVXU. Our producer is Selena Reeder. Associate producer is Asia Johnson. Technical director is Marshall Verbsky. If you miss our program live, you can subscribe to Cincinnati Edition wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lucy May. Thank you so much for listening.